Today's lecture is going to be covering the New England northern colonies, so different from the southern colonies. And based on this image already, based on what you see here, what we already know is important to the northern colonies. Religion, Christianity is going to be very important to them. So go ahead and write down New England northern colonies. I believe this is section 4 or something of their notes. And let's dive right in. So, ready? Here we go. Some background. You should be familiar with the Reformation. Many of you should have learned this last year in world history. And the Reformation was the splitting of the Catholic Church. The Reformation was the splitting of the Catholic Church between which two groups? Yeah, you had the Protestants who broke away in protest, hence the name Protestants. And then you had the Catholics who remained as part of the church, still the Catholics. Fabian, yes.
Why is that demon, I guess?
That's supposed to be Martin Luther, and the idea was that the devil was playing Martin Luther. The devil was responsible for splitting the church, as some Catholics believed. So that's why there's a devil here. The belief is that Martin Luther was being controlled by the devil to split the church. In any case, so the Catholic Church is split between the Catholics and the Protestants. As many of you may remember, the reason why many people broke away from the church was because of the buying of indulgences. For those of you that don't remember or don't know what this is, an indulgence was when you can buy your forgiveness from the church. The idea was if you sinned, all you had to go was to a priest and say, "I'm sorry, here's $1,000. And I'm like, "Oh no, you're good." That was it. Now, because of that, is this a bit of a corrupt system? Sure, you could get away with anything if you just bought indulgences. So did a lot of devout Christians have a problem with this system? Sure. They had other problems. They realized they had a problem with communion. They had a problem with the scripture. They had a problem with a lot of the church. So many of them began breaking away. And one of the people that broke away was a man named John Calvin. And he created a religion called Calvinism. So John Calvin, who was a Protestant, broke away from the Catholic Church, just like the rest of the Protestants, and he created his own religion called Calvinism, because he believed the Catholic Church was just wrong about its interpretation about how to get to heaven. And according to Calvinism, the belief was something called predestination. And the idea behind predestination was that your life was determined, or so rather, that's the easiest way to put this. Pretty much the idea was that you were already predestined to go to heaven or hell. You know the notion that God is omniscient, he's all-knowing, so he knows everything that you're going to do, which means God already knows if you're going to heaven or hell. That was the idea of predestination. The second you were born, you were already slated to go to heaven or hell. So the problem was, those going to heaven were known as the elect, or visible saints. And those going to hell were known as the damned. Now, if you believed in a religion that told you whether you were going to heaven or hell was already predetermined, wouldn't you want to know which of these you were? Like, you'd want, okay, if I'm already going to hell, I want to know it. If I'm already going to heaven, I also want to know it. And so they tried to figure out clues to see if they could guess who they thought was damned or elect. And ultimately, they came to the conclusion that God was giving us clues. And the clues were, if you were an elect, you kind of knew you were an elect because you had a good life. The idea being God was already blessing you right now. So if you were, doing well off, your family was healthy, might God already be blessing you? And that was a clue as to you being able to die and going to heaven with God, which was awesome. But there were also clues if you were damned. And normally if you were poor, they might say, "Oh, you're probably going to be a bad person when you grow up. So that's probably why you're poor. So there was a sense that if you were poor, God was already punishing you for something you were going to commit, and you were already going to go to hell. Yes, sir.
Does this psychologically affect a lot of people?
Did it psychologically affect a lot of people? Of course it did. Because imagine, if someone's poor, are you going to help them? No, because God wants them to be poor. And so the argument is there's a lack of charity. Maybe some people will still help, but more people will turn away and say, oh, you probably messed up. Or I'm already damned. There's nothing more I can do. I might as well live the life of a damned person and commit crimes and murders and whatever else. So it did affect a lot of people psychologically, socially. Society was affected by this type of religion. So is this religion very different from the Catholic Church? And this religion began to spread across all of Europe. Many people became Calvinists across all of Europe. Good so far with Calvinism. Okay. Another Protestant religion that emerged was the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church, also known as the Church of England. By the way, the word Anglican just means English, so if you are anglicized, that means you're becoming more English, or the word Anglo means English, so just Angle is English. Not the word angle, but like Anglo. Anglican, that's usually refers to being English. In any case, as you may remember, this guy, King Henry VIII, he created the Catholic, Anglican Church by breaking away from the Catholic Church too. But did he break away from the Catholic Church because he had fundamental problems with the scripture, or the way the Bible was interpreted, or the fact that there were priests? Nothing like that, right? He broke away from the Catholic Church because the Pope refused to give him what? A divorce. A divorce. Remember, King Henry VIII was married several times, and he wanted to divorce his wife so he can sleep with a new wife. And he said, I want to marry that girl over there. And the Pope said, no, King Henry VIII, I'm not going to grant you a divorce. We don't do that here in the Catholic Church. So King Henry VIII said, fine, I'm going to break away from the Catholic Church. I'm going to make my own church called the Anglican Church, and I'm going to be in charge of it. And when I'm in charge of the Anglican Church, I'm going to give myself a divorce. So, the only change in the Anglican Church is that instead of a pope, who's in charge? The king. That's about it. That's really the only change. I guess divorce also changed.
Was that the first recorded?
Oh, well, I mean, for him, yeah. Well, not the first recorded, but that's the first divorce in the Anglican Church. But in any case, folks, did he break away for fundamental reasons? Did he break away because he had a lot of serious problems with the church? No, he broke away for self-interest, right? But is the rest of the Anglican Church going to remain the same as the Catholic? They're still going to have bishops, they're still going to have priests, they're still going to do communion, and all the saints, and the bowing, and the kneeling. That's all part of it. So, was this a real break from the Catholic Church? Not really. So, here's what happened. A group of Puritans emerges in England. A group of Puritans emerge in England. And these Puritans were Calvinists. So a group of Puritans emerge in England, and these Puritans were Calvinists. And were they happy that the Anglican Church broke away from the Catholic Church? Does that make them happy that they broke away? These Calvinists that are Protestants, are they happy that the Anglican Church broke away from the Catholic Church? They are happy about it. They're like, yay, hey, King Henry VIII, it's awesome that you broke away. The problem is, you didn't change enough of the church. I think it's baby steps. That's great. You broke away, but we need more change. And so what the Puritans wanted to do, it's in their name, is they wanted to purify the Anglican Church of its Catholicness. The Puritans wanted to purify the Anglican Church of its Catholicness. They wanted to make the Anglican Church less Catholic. They said, we like that you broke away, but I feel like you could step forward just a bit more. So again, they want to purify the Anglican Church of its Catholicness. Good so far. Now, the part that you don't have to know, but then we'll get back to the part you do have to know in a bit, is that the Puritans do eventually take control of England, and then when they're in charge, they take away religious freedom from everyone except for Puritans. So Anglicans can't worship anymore, and Catholics can't worship, and life is pretty terrible, and people feel harassed and persecuted by the Puritan government. Eventually, the Puritans are kicked out of power, and they're driven out of the country. You guys remember that, right? So eventually, the Puritans, here's the part you do have to know again. The Puritans leave England because of religious persecution. The Puritans leave England because of religious persecution. And they leave as the Pilgrims, right? You guys remember the Pilgrims? They come to America. So they leave as the Pilgrims, and they come to America in search for what? What's the story? They're leaving religious persecution so they can come to America and find religious freedom. We know the story. The fun part of that story is that the reason why they were kicked out was that they were denying everyone else religious freedom. And when they came to America, when they wanted religious freedom, they only meant religious freedom for themselves. So if there was a Catholic on board, let's say, they would push him off the boat and be like, no, we meant religious freedom for us. We didn't mean for you people. It was just for us. And so anyway, the Pilgrims are kicked out of England, or rather the Puritans are kicked out of England, and they become the Pilgrims, and they sail to the Americas for religious freedom. Good so far. Now, when they sail to the Americas, again, the hope is to still purify the Anglican Church. They still want to do that. But another group emerges called the Separatists. And they are also in this Pilgrim group. And unlike the Puritans that want to stay part of the church and purify it, what do the Separatists want to do? Yeah.
Did they emerge from?
Okay, so they were Puritans that became Separatists. And what Separatists wanted to do was what? They wanted to separate from the Church of England. The Puritans, do they want to separate? They want to purify it, make it better. But the Separatists said, why even bother doing that? It's going to take way too long. They're going to resist. Why not separate and make our own church? So that's what the Separatists wanted to do, is to separate from the Anglican Church and make their own church. But here's the problem with separating from the Anglican Church. If they separate from the Anglican Church, who else are they separating from? The King of England, because he's in charge. So that's going to be somewhat of a problem. And they said, these guys are going to be a bit problematic, these Separatists. So, everyone good? Clear? So again, the Pilgrims were everyone on the ship, and the Pilgrims were divided between Puritans who wanted to stay part of the church and the Separatists who wanted to break away from the church. Everyone clear on that? Yep. Eventually, in 1620, the colonists and the Pilgrims finally arrive where? Where do they land, folks? What's the story? And they land where specifically? They land on Plymouth Rock. You guys are familiar with the story, right? Landing on Plymouth Rock. And so in 1620, the colonists land in Plymouth. But the first few things. Number one, that's not true, despite what you've been told. So, one, they didn't land on Plymouth Rock. In fact, there's no such thing as Plymouth Rock. The fun fact was that you can go to Massachusetts, in Plymouth, and there's a monument with a rock inside, and it says 1620 on it. Like, oh, this is where the Pilgrim landed, on Plymouth Rock. But that's just some random rock. That's not like the rock that they landed on. It's not. It's just some rock that they picked up. We're like, that will be the one that we built a monument around. So one, Plymouth Rock is not a real thing, and the one that's there is just some random. That's like if I said, oh, this is the pencil that George Washington used. Let's put that in a monument. It's the same thing. Secondly, they didn't even land in Plymouth first. When they first came to America, they landed around here on the other side of Cape Cod Bay. And after a while, they're like, this is not that great. And then they went to Plymouth. So that's also a lie. Thirdly, the story of Plymouth Rock, we suspect it emerged around 1880. And the idea was that a drunk old man in like Boston, I imagine, was walking down the beach with his friends. And he was like, my great-grandfather was one of the Plymouth people when they first came on the Mayflower. And they landed right there, right on that rock. That's where they were. So that's kind of where the story began. It was the drunken ramblings of an old man trying to show off to his friends. And yet it became an American tradition. So, that's kind of where that came from. Still, they did land in 1620 in Plymouth Colony, so that part is true. And they were led by a man named William Bradford. Yay, not a John. His name is William Bradford. Several. John's a biblical name, so that's where it comes from. Anyway, William Bradford is the leader of this group of pilgrims. And they arrive on what ship? The Mayflower Compact. Not the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria. So they arrive on the Mayflower, and before they get off the boat, they say, hey, before we get off this ship, we all have to sign a document agreeing to a few things. So they said, okay, fine. So they all signed something called the Mayflower Compact before getting off the boat. A compact, of course, being an agreement. And the agreement was really important. There's three things you should know about this agreement, the Mayflower Compact. The first thing you should know is that it introduced democracy. So it said we were going to have democracy in Plymouth. Number two, it said they were going to pledge loyalty to the king. They all had to pledge loyalty to the king. And that's going to solve which problem? The problem of the separatists, right? So they're going to pledge loyalty to the king. And the third thing you should know about the Mayflower Compact was that it was a foundation for self-government. It was a foundation for self-government. It wasn't a constitution, it wasn't like a specific set of laws, but it was the basis or the foundation for self-government. Now you might think, why did the separatists just sign it and then lie and then walk away? Well, signing your name back then was a really big deal. You didn't just sign your name to anything. You signed your name when you really meant it. So that's kind of why they signed it and they followed along. So anyway, they get there, and in 1621, here's them signing the Mayflower, by the way, Mayflower Compact. In 1621, they have the first Thanksgiving, right? And the story of Thanksgiving is we invited the Native Americans, and we had bountiful feast to thank them for everything, and it was, yes.
Who was William the leader of?
The Pilgrims. And so they have this first thing, they have turkey and whatever else. No, that's not what happened. Sorry.
It was the first Thanksgiving.
It was the first Thanksgiving, I guess, if it was. But here's what really happened at the first Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims were having dinner. The Native Americans smelled it. They showed up and they're like, hey, you want to eat? We're making dinner. And they're like, yeah. And then it became Thanksgiving. That's about it. That would be the equivalent of you cooking dinner at home and I showed up randomly and they'd be like, let's make this a holiday. That's kind of what happened. And they always cooked food on Sundays. This wasn't like a surprise. It was just that they showed up one day at this dinner that they were having and they're like, hey, now that you're here, thanks. And then dinner was served. Also, no turkey. I know. You would expect there to be turkey. No. So again, much of this is not true. I imagine the turkey came about when we had too many turkeys and the turkey lobby was like, we should get people to eat turkey. Fun fact, Benjamin Franklin wanted our national bird to be a turkey. He did. Turkeys are really smart, and they're like vicious, and they fight a lot. Instead, we chose the bald eagle, and Native Americans were like, really, bald eagle? The scavenger bird that only eats like dead animals and steals from others? Oh yeah, that makes sense. That would be a good example of America. So Native Americans, they saw our bald eagle, like, you're gonna go with that one? Okay, that's appropriate. Whereas a turkey was like, Ben Franklin thought was like a very noble bird. But we didn't go with turkey, we went with bald eagle. Anyway, in 1691, Plymouth is absorbed by Massachusetts Bay. So in 1691, Plymouth is absorbed by Massachusetts Bay Colony. And now we'll talk about Massachusetts Bay Colony. But in 1691, Plymouth Colony is absorbed by Massachusetts Bay Colony. Pretty much the reason why is Plymouth was too small to exist on its own, and Massachusetts Bay was just much better off. So they said, we'll just help you. They were absorbed by Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691. Okay, so let's talk about Massachusetts Bay Colony. Massachusetts Bay was founded in 1630, 10 years later after Plymouth, and it was founded by this man, John Winthrop. John Winthrop. Now, John Winthrop was a very successful governor. He was elected governor 19 times of Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is a lot. Even if that was a one-year term, that's still a lot. If it was a two-year term, that's almost 38 years. So he was very successful at what he did. And something you should know about him is that Massachusetts Bay was mostly Puritans. Let's put it that way first. Massachusetts Bay was mostly Puritans. And John Winthrop was happy with that, and he wanted every colonist to have a covenant with God. He wanted every colonist in Massachusetts Bay to have a covenant with God. What's the question?
They were mostly what?
Puritans. They're mostly Puritans. And John Winthrop said, okay, so everyone here is Puritan, so I want all of you to have a covenant with God. A covenant with God, which was a agreement or relationship with God. That's what covenant means, to have a relationship or agreement with God. And the reason why he wanted that was because he wanted Massachusetts Bay to become a strong city based on faith. He wanted Massachusetts Bay to become a strong city based on Puritan faith. Okay, he wanted it to become a strong city based on Puritan faith. He wanted to be a strong city based on Puritan faith. He was hoping that eventually, and this is a phrase that you definitely should know, that Massachusetts Bay, if successful, would eventually become a city upon a hill. A city upon a hill. And this is an imagery used by almost every single president, that we should become a city upon a hill. A city upon a hill. And the idea of making us a city upon a hill was that we wanted to become a shining example to the world. A city on a hill, upon a hill, meant that we would become a shining example to the world. Because if Massachusetts Bay became very successful, we could argue that we became successful. Why? Because of our faith in God. So the hope was, if we became successful, we could become a shining example to the world. And that faith could bring economic success. That's what he wanted. Good so far? So you should know John Winthrop, City upon a hill, covenant. May I move on? Politically, they established something called the General Court. And this was their colonial assembly. The General Court, it was their colonial assembly. Just like what in Virginia? House of Burgesses. The House of Burgesses. So again, very similar to the House of Burgesses in Virginia. This is their colonial assembly. Their colonial assembly, which means, what do they have in Massachusetts?
Democracy.
They have democracy, right? They have democracy. Now, their democracy was still a bit limited because the requirements to vote were what? So who can raise their hand and tell me one requirement to vote back then? What might you need to vote? So, Nick, give me one.
You gotta be a male.
Male, definitely. So, sexism is apparent. Eileen, give me another. White, definitely. So, racism is still apparent. Definitely. Yeah, Fabian? Huh? What colony is this? They had to be what? Religious. And lastly, yes. Land, very good. Landowners. So did they have democracy? Yes, but was it restricted? Not everyone could vote. Okay, you had to be a male, white, land-owning, religious person. So they did restrict the vote. But the cool thing about the colonial assembly is that it gave the people a lot of power. Obviously, people are elected to be a part of it. And one of the important powers that they had was something called the power of the purse. What would they vote for? They would vote for who would become, let's say, their representatives. They would vote to create laws like, okay, so do we have slaves or no? Should we legalize this kind of trade or no? So one of the powers that they had was something called power of the purse. Hello? Nice. Oh, I see. Sure. Nice. Denise, you're going home? Okay. 7 level 1s, 5 level 2s, 3 level 3s. So right, 7, 5, 3 on that. Power of the purse. What power of the purse meant was that the people had the power over what? Huh? Money, very good. Because when you think of purse initially, what is a purse supposed to carry? Money. So even back then, men used to carry purses, like a coin purse, right? Maybe a satchel, but even in that satchel, they might carry a coin purse within the satchel. Precisely, like a little coin purse, whatever. Anyway, so it gave us the power over money. And the reason why this was such an important power is, could the governor do anything without money? No. So would the government have to listen to the people? That's the basic idea. Because if the government controlled both money and the power in the government, did he really need democracy? No. Now that we have power, it gives us more of a voice in what we do. So that's pretty important. But the other cool thing, the North also had something called town meetings. And what you should note about town meetings is that town meetings were the most democratic form of government. So town meetings were considered to be the most democratic form of government in colonies. They were considered to be the most democratic form of government in the colonies. The most democratic form of government in the colonies. And here's why. In this town, you had a meeting hall right here, center. Okay? And first off, why are they able to have towns in the north? What don't they have? They don't have a lot of plantations, and so are a lot of people on their small farms going to be living really close together? Sure, and when you all live together and you want to make decisions, who should have a voice in that decision? Everyone, so even the women and the children and the men would all have a say as to, like, what should we do on Tuesday? Taco Tuesday, the women would say. And then the women would fight for Taco Tuesday. And they would have a voice in government. Would they have the same power and voice in, let's say, the general court? No. So the general court was restricted. But in a town meeting, everyone had a voice, which made it very democratic. I mean, look at Congress. Do you get to speak to Congress every day? Like in Washington, D.C.? No. But could your voice carry some weight here in the local city council? Definitely. That's the same idea. Because it's more local, it's more responsive to your needs. So very democratic, these town meetings. So that's the politics. Social. The social is fun. I like talking about social issues. So socially, let's talk about the Puritan lifestyle. So the Puritan lifestyle, folks, the first thing we should note is that family was very important. Family was the cornerstone of Massachusetts Bay. Family was very important. In fact, family was so important that single men and women were not allowed to come to Massachusetts Bay. So if you were in England and you wanted to sail to America, but you were single, you weren't allowed to come. And why not? Why were single men and women not allowed to come to America in droves and just like roam around the town? Yeah.
Because they couldn't reproduce.
Well, they might not, they could reproduce. Not that they can't reproduce, is that what? Yeah, Grisella.
They would, like, the men or the women would probably interfere with other families, like the husband or the wife.
So let's not beat around the bush. Let's be more clear about what that means. Yeah. Yeah, they might perform adultery. Single men and women. They represent immorality. Who knows what they'll do? The word I like to use is that they felt that single men and women promoted adultery, immorality, and promiscuity. They were promiscuous. So they really want to avoid promiscuous girls. They really did not want them at all. Because, I mean, oftentimes they would be teasing the guys, and that was just not good. So, also no promiscuous boys. None of that either. Now, so that's why they don't want single people. But they did believe that family brought stability. Because if you have a family, are you going to go out and do ridiculous things? No, because you got to feed your kids. You know, so I'm going to wrestle that bear. Oh, no, I have kids. Never mind. You do it. I can't go wrestle that bear anymore. So that's the first thing about families. It did bring stability. Also, most of these families are very patriarchal. Male dominated. The husband is in charge. Has that gone away a little bit in our more modern times?
Yes.
Society today, it's a little bit more balanced. I mean, you have mother and father a little bit more equal, especially if you have a single family homes or a single parent homes where like just the mother in charge. Even in a lot of families now, relationships, you have like equal parenting where both the mom and the dad are a little bit more equal. So I think as time goes, there's a lot more equality between the genders. Anyway, other things you should note about them is that these families controlled their children by breaking their spirits. They controlled their children by breaking their spirits. This is always a fun story. But they would control their children by breaking their spirits. Let me give you an example. Suppose you're in 3rd grade and you just got an A on a test and you're super excited. So you're running home, Mommy, I got an A on my test. And your mom looks out the window as you're screaming and she slams the door open. She says, "Get in here!" And she says, "Were you just screaming through the town, bringing shame upon this family? What you just did is a sin of pride. How dare you?" And so she would take her child and beat him just a little bit and then drag him out into the middle of the town square and say, this is my child, and he is guilty of the sin of pride. Boo, my child. Like, boo, you're a terrible kid. Boo. And then, that would happen. And so they would do that because they wanted to make sure that these kids were, not prideful and they were not envious, that they practiced good Christian principles and avoided the sins whatsoever. Yes. The stockades, of course they would put them in the stockades. If you were to say you stole, you drag your child out, you put him in the stockades, you'd be like, boo, my child, like, boo, you're probably going to hell, boo, you're a terrible person. So they would do those things. I imagine they might throw food, but that's wasteful, so that's not very likely. Anyway, so they would break down their children's spirits through shaming and beating. Okay, but the hard part was that by the age of 12 or 13, you got really hard to beat your kids because you got to know them and they were kind of funny and you really started to love them a lot. So at about the age of 12 or 13, they would send them away. To another family at the other end of town so that these families could beat them more because they didn't care about you. And so in order to make sure that you had another 3-4 years of good beatings and shamings to make sure that you became a good Christian, they would send you off so that they could shame and beat you because they didn't care about you. You were new to them. But your parents I love you and I can't beat you anymore because you're so cool. So I'm sending you away for 3 or 4 years to this family, and they don't know you, and they will make you feel the rod. Yes.
So would you like Amish people?
They're not the same group.
When do they?
I mean, they're around, but we'll talk about them later. In any case, folks, that's how they raise their kids in a very interesting way. Well, in terms of having fun, I mean, these guys did know how to have fun. Let me just say. I mean, despite the very religious upbringing, they did have a great time. Let's talk about free time in the Puritan society. So your free time could be divided among the following, so take your pick. First, church. So definitely, if you were considering maybe having a sweet time, you go to church, pray to the Lord a bit. That's always a fun times. If not that, and you want to get really crazy, you might have some family time, Yes. Sit around the fire and talk about your day. Am I right? Maybe knit a sweater as a family. You do the first cross stitch, I'll do the second. No, you do the next cross stitch. But let's say that, your family was ridiculous and you guys really knew to have a good time. You might tell stories, let me tell you the story about David and Goliath. And that's actually a pretty cool story. But they would tell biblical stories or let me tell you about the story of how pie was made. And oh, I love this story. But let's say you were one of those families that were kind of rebellious, you were almost outcasted families. You guys might have picnics, and then so they knew how to live it up back then. The Puritans were pretty ridiculous. Good times. Other rules, of course, no alcohol. So obviously no alcohol in the society. No alcohol, obviously, and also no colorful clothes. So the vast majority of you are okay, but some of you are in trouble. Because no colorful clothing. So blacks, white, browns were okay, grays, red? Are you trying to draw attention to yourself? Are you trying to stand out? That's a sin of pride. Exactly, you can't do that. Sorry, does your shirt have a stripe on it? Oh, I'm sorry, are you too good for monochrome clothing? You want to be fancy with your stripe? So you try to avoid those things. Something else important in these colonies, folks, was education. Education was very important. In fact, there was a law called the Massachusetts Education Law. The Massachusetts Education Law. And what the Massachusetts Education Law said was that you would build a school for every 50 families. So again, the Massachusetts Education Law said that they would build a school for every 50 families. The Massachusetts Education Law, a school for every 50 families. So does that give you a sense of how important education was? They didn't do this in the South. And if, let's say your school was, like, your town was like 44 people, how would they educate their kids? Homeschool. They would still do homeschooling. So it wasn't like, oh, we won't educate our kids until we have 50 people. It was important enough where they homeschooled their children or they promoted building of schools in the North. Yes?
How many children did they have?
On average, like 2 to 3. And again, maybe some had like 5. But again, remember, the more children you have, the more you have to feed. So it depended. Some people found having children beneficial to help with the farm. Others found that having too many kids as being a liability because you'd have to feed them. It just depended on how good a farmer you were. Also, we know that education was really important because in 1636 they built the first college in America. What college is that? Harvard. Harvard in 1636. Harvard College. Harvard. Harvard. 1636. Harvard. Harvard. By the way, what was the only thing they taught back in 1636 in Harvard? English, no. Law, no. Religion. They only taught religion. Or, if you want to be fancy, guys, here's some college speak. Theology. Boom. Go impress your friends. Be like, would you like to have a theological discussion? I'm sorry, I meant religion. But I'm taking AP now when we say theological. So, impress your friends. Theology, it's a study of religion. Okay, that's what theology is. Anyway, so another important aspect of Puritan lifestyle was the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant work ethic. By the way, these guys might not be Protestant at all, but they do have the Protestant work ethic. And the idea behind the Protestant work ethic is that they believed in hard work. They believed in hard work. So if they're going to do a lot of the work themselves, what are they not going to have in the North? Slaves. They will have machines eventually, but that's still hard work. But they won't have slaves. They won't have indentured servants. And because of that, they won't have what type of farms? Plantations. They won't have plantations because do they want to do the work themselves? Sure. And in fact, what type of farmers will they become? What do you call it when they grow the food themselves and they make just enough close, not substantial. Substance. Subsistence farmers. They became subsistence farmers. They grew just enough to eat, right? So they would work for themselves to feed their families, but that was it. And the other reason why they weren't going to have plantations is, what was the purpose of a plantation? Why would I want to have a plantation? Cash crops, to make money. And these people are very religious. So what's not supposed to be very important to them? Money. So what you should note is that religion was greater than wealth. Massive. So religion was greater than wealth. Cool? Yep. Okay. Now, there were those that disagreed. These people were known as the religious dissenters. And what does dissent mean? I just told you. To disagree. So if you dissent, like, I like apples. No, not I. I dissent. You disagree. Okay? So these people disagreed with the way Massachusetts Bay was running. And so the two people that you should know is first, Roger Williams. And Roger Williams believed in religious toleration. Because were Puritans very religiously tolerant? No, they were not. So he wanted a colony that promoted religious toleration. He said, Massachusetts Bay, can we be more religiously tolerant? And they said no. So he said, okay, I'm going to create my own colony. And he created Rhode Island. So one really easy way to remember this is that Roger Williams founded Rhode Island for religious toleration. Roger Williams founded Rhode Island for religious toleration. So that's one really good way to know this fact. And then that'll be one question that you know on your test out of like 80. So 79 more to go, right? So pretty sweet. So he leaves and makes his own colony in Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson was another person, though. She also dissented, and she got into trouble for a lot of reasons. The first, she believed that women were equal to men, which is crazy back then. Not today. Today it makes sense, but back then that was nuts. She believed that women should be equal to men. And they're like, no, Anne Hutchinson, we're not going to have any of that. But she also believed in a dangerous idea that she promoted called antinomianism, which is a term you should know. Antinomianism. And what antinomianism said was that you need not follow man's law. You need not follow man's law. Or you don't have to follow the laws, however you want to put that. But you need not follow man's law, or you don't have to follow the laws. And the reason why she believed that was that this was a form of extreme predestination. What happened was that many of the Puritan ministers, they try to get people to still live a good life. They said, oh, well, you don't know if you're elect for sure, so you should do these things to make it easier for you to be elect. But she said, no, you need not follow man's law. If you're already predestined to go to heaven, is there anything you can do about it? And if you're going to hell, is there anything you can do about that? So she said, look, if you're going to murder a guy, that was supposed to happen anyway. So who cares what the rules are? Those guys don't know what they're talking about. They were just told, they just think they're right. But they could be wrong. So do whatever you want, because isn't that what God expected you to do anyway? So don't follow rules, because if you don't, that's okay, because God knew you weren't going to follow the rules anyway. So forget everything. Do whatever you want. Now, if you're part of the government, would that be a very dangerous philosophy to be promoting? Definitely. It would cause chaos. So they said, Anne Hutchinson, get out or we're going to put you in jail. So they threatened to jail her. But that's not what got her almost killed. Anne Hutchinson was almost put to death by Massachusetts because she said, I'm not going to do that. I know I'm right. And it's what she said next that almost got her put to death. And she said, I know I'm right because I can speak to God directly. You're not supposed to say that. What almost got her killed was she believed she could speak to God directly. And why might that be a problem if someone goes around saying, hey guys, listen to me, God speaks to me directly? Why might that be a problem for people in government? What might she do with said power? Huh? She might have a rebellion, right? She might take over. And so they feared this, and so they said, Anne Hutchinson, either you get out of our colony or we're going to kill you. So she left. And then she went to Rhode Island to hang out with Roger Williams. She's like, ooh, you're too crazy, get out of here. Like, we don't have tolerance for that. So she left, and then she was killed by Native Americans. And then it's not like, oh, you're crazy, let's kill you. No, she was just in a town that was attacked by Native Americans, and she was one of the people that were killed. Yeah, they weren't like, let's kill that one. She's crazy. Anyway, that's your religious dissenters. Speaking of Native Americans, let's talk about the New England Wars. We're continuing our notes. How are you guys doing? Many of your hands are cramping, I noticed. King Philip's War was a war with Native Americans. Okay? Specifically, it was a war against this guy, who they called King Philip, but his real name was Metacom.
War against the natives?
War against natives. Metacom.
Sounds like a robot.
Sure. Now, there are two reasons why these wars were fought in New England. What is the obvious reason why they're fighting wars with Native Americans? Land, right? That's the obvious reason. Land. He was the leader of this group. Though, well, specific. If you want to know the group, they were the Wampanoags. He was the leader of the Wampanoags. Okay, he was the one that they were taking land from. But secondly, the other reason why natives were upset was because what was really important in the North that probably upset the Native Americans? Religion. What did they try to do that made the natives angry? Exactly. They tried to convert the natives. And that really made a lot of the Native Americans angry. Because it's one thing to take away someone's land, but it's a very different thing to take away someone's culture, right? Like, you're drastically changing who they are as a person. I mean, is Native American culture deeply rooted in, like, their own religions? Animism, believing in spirits, whatever else. But if you told a Native American, you're wrong and you should believe in this, and they do, isn't that going to drastically change who they are as a person? Very much so. So they said, we're not okay with this at all. And so they began attacking the Americans. They also, the colonists, they're not Americans yet. And they also began attacking what were known as prayer towns. Prayer towns are where they tried to convert Native Americans. Okay, prayer towns are where they tried to convert Native Americans, and here's where they would kill colonists and other natives that were converted. They were considered a poison, right? And we have the disease of, like, viruses, and also the disease of the mind is what they saw. That you're changing who we are as a people. They didn't like that so much. The other Native American war you guys should know, just by name, is the Pequot War. Any questions? Prayer towns, again, are where they tried to convert Native Americans. That's a prayer town. It's a town where they tried to convert Native Americans. And those were attacked by the hostile natives that were angry with them. Again, the other Native American war you guys should know is the Pequot War. Good? Because of all the attacks by Native Americans, the New England colonies decided to create something called the New England Confederation. And the New England Confederation was a military alliance. It was a military alliance against the natives. And the basic idea is when you attacked one of these colonies, what would happen? The others would come and help. So this was a military alliance against the natives. Because remember, folks, all of these colonies were founded separately, right? They weren't all founded together. So did they still have unique identities? Like, I'm Rhode Island, I'm Massachusetts, I'm Connecticut. They were all very different and unique. So the New England Confederation did something important. It created a tradition of cooperation. It created a tradition of cooperation. The New England Confederation created a tradition of cooperation. And why might that be important 100 years from now? When might these colonies have to cooperate? When might the colonies all have to cooperate? Against who? No, the British. In about 100 years, are we going to have to cooperate against the British? Most definitely. So if we start cooperating now, is that going to be a lot easier for us? We have a tradition of it starting now. The other thing you should note is that we also created something called the Dominion of New England. And this was an economic system forced onto the colonies. Forced unto the colonies. Onto is not a word. Unto is a word. So, forced unto the colonies. And here's what its purpose was. The purpose was to restore mercantilism. Because as we previously stated, were the New England colonies practicing mercantilism? No, they came for their own reasons, right? And England finally realized, wait a minute, why are you there not benefiting us? So they decided to try to force mercantilism on the colonies. Question. Okay. So again, they tried to force this economic system onto the colonies to, again, benefit England. Good there. And by the way, it didn't work. It was really difficult to enforce, so no biggie. But we'll talk more about that later. So, a general overview of the colonies. Yep. First thing you guys should note, mostly what kind of economy do they have in the north? Agricultural. What type of agricultural farming did we perform? Subsistence farming, mostly subsistence farming. But they also did engage in shipping and trade and shipbuilding. There's like fishing, lumber, whatever else. But again, know the top three. By the way, have you guys seen that Kohl's commercial where they're like, this guy's like buying pants at Kohl's and he realizes he can send them home via the mail. So he yells at his wife, "Honey, I just shipped my pants." Because he shipped his pants. But it sounds like the other thing. But he shipped them. Oh. It's a pretty funny commercial. He shipped his pants. Anyway, so that's their economy. Their economy was closely tied to what do you call this? Triangle trade. The northern economy is closely tied to the triangle trade. Pretty much one example of the triangle trade is that the Africans would send slaves to the Americas. Then the New England colonies would send sugar that would use the Africans' work to get the sugar. And then England would turn that African sugar into rum, like liquor, and then they would sell that rum to Africa to buy more slaves. So that's triangle trade. It was just like a circuit of trading between these three regions: Africa, Europe, and America. Good. Socially, what's very important in the North? Religion, what else? Family, what else? Religion, family, education. So the three really important things: religion, family, education. It's really important in the North. The life expectancy in the North? 70. So they lived to 70 in the North. Is that a big difference from South? Yeah, they're not even that far apart, and yet 20 years more is a life expectancy, which is fairly impressive. So life expectancy of 70. You should also note that high birth rate. Why might they have a high birth rate in the north?
They have a lot of families.
Families, very good. Lots of families. And there were Native American conflicts in the north. There were Native American conflicts in the north. Lastly, let's talk about politics. Or just summary. The politics, again, did they have democracy?
Yeah.
Yes, they did. And the most democratic form of government was what?
Town meetings.
Town meetings. You should be familiar with town meetings. And you should also be familiar with the Mayflower Compact. The most democratic form of gouvernement and the colony. Cool? Okay. I'll give you guys like a 4-minute stretch break. I know we powered through that, so. Good job, though. I mean, I noticed when you guys are like, oh my gosh, my hand is dying. But, you know, it's life. So I'll give you guys about 4 minutes, and then we'll continue. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. I might as well pass your homework. Your homework for the weekend is sin. Okay, there should be extras on this side. Can you guys pass the extras on to the other side? They need more on the other side. Do we need any more? How many more do we need? If you need a copy of the Howard Zinn reading, they're printing out right now. Your homework, guys, is going to be 753. 7 level 1s, 5 level 2s, 3 3s. 753. Hey, Karen, if you can explain what that means, I'm not just talking nonsense. She'll figure out what that means. What does that mean? Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna give her the sheet. The reading for tonight or this weekend will consist of, you'll read about Bacon's Rebellion. You'll also read about the Pequot War, King Philip's War. You'll read about a lot of those attacks between the different groups. All right, folks, let's finish up here. We may finish early. If we do, then that's great. If not, then, again, we'll move forward. No, last section, yeah. So this is still part of the unit, but it's a different section. So section 5, whatever number this is. So, the middle colonies and colonial life. So the two colonies we're going to be talking about are New York and Pennsylvania. New York and Pennsylvania are the two colonies we're going to be talking about. Again, New York and Pennsylvania, the middle colonies. And we're going to do this pretty quickly. So, first off, let's talk about New York. New York was originally controlled by the Swedish. The Swedish. And the Swedish called it New Sweden. So the Swedish called it New Sweden. But then the Swedish were overtaken by the Dutch. And the Dutch called this Amsterdam. So the Swedish lost to the Dutch. Now, at this point, the British controlled New England and they controlled the southern colonies. But they did not control the middle. So what would make sense if you're a British colonizer? We should probably also colonize the middle, because could you then connect your colonies? And do you want this Dutch colony right in the middle, making it difficult for you to trade? No. So the British sent the Duke of York, this guy. And the Duke of York was sent to take over New York. And he did, without any bloodshed. He successfully took over New York without a fight. In fact, what happened was the Dutch were so happy that the British were going to be taking them over. They're like, oh yeah, we would love to be British citizens because the Dutch are mismanaging this colony. So they actually took it over without a fight. The colonists is like, oh yeah, come on in, have some tea. We are now your subjects. So pretty simple. So the Duke of York takes over, thus naming it New York, named after himself. Now, because of the history of New York, what we're going to learn is that New York is the most diverse colony. It's very diverse. There are different groups of people living there. It's very diverse. I'm just going to list a bunch of people that live there and write down like 3 or 4. But there was the Swedish, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Finnish, the Norwegians. You have some of the Castilians, the Basque. You have the Italians. So there's a lot. You can keep going. Greeks, Belarusians, the Russians, the Croatians. But anyway, a few of those. So again, you get an idea, right? Very diverse. In fact, isn't New York still one of the most diverse places ever? Yeah, so it's part of their history. The other cool thing you should know about New York is the Dutch influence that we now have in our culture. Because of this originally Dutch city or Dutch colony, we absorbed a lot of that culture, and we ourselves do a lot of things that are Dutch, that are not British in nature. So I'm just going to give you a list of Dutch things that we do that might surprise you. Number 1, waffles. Waffles are Dutch. So when you say Lego my ego, that's a Dutch thing. Also, Easter eggs are Dutch. I know. So when you're celebrating the birth or the rebirthing or what do you call it, the return of Christ, and you're looking for egg with chocolate in it because that makes sense. You do a Dutch tradition by finding Easter eggs to honor Jesus' return. Why? But that's what we do in this country. Skiing. Skiing is also something that the Dutch introduced. Skiing. That's 2 I's. Skiing. You should, because these are Dutch things that are part of American culture. Bowling. Bowling is Dutch. Bowling. I'm a big fan of bowling. That's Dutch. Close. Bowling is Dutch. Santa Claus is Dutch. His name was Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas. I mean, most cultures had a Santa Claus type character, but we pulled ours from the Dutch. Sinterklaas. And then golf, which was kalf. Yes, Fabian.
So, like, you know, like the Dutch made waffles, and then the Belgians made their own variation of waffles?
Well, the Belgians are like Dutch, also. Sort of. I mean, they have very similar histories. Yes.
I read where the Coca-Cola introduced Santa Claus.
And it's what? Introduced by the Dutch?
No, the Coca-Cola introduced Santa Claus.
No, not at all. But Coca-Cola did teach us how to deal with polar bears. You just give them sunglasses and a Coke, and then they'll leave you alone. It's very impressive. So just whenever you go to Alaska, just bring a Coke and sunglasses. And like, polar bear, quick! Put on these sunglasses. New Jersey comes from New York. It breaks away and it makes its own colony, but who cares? It's New Jersey. And then, yeah. Pennsylvania's next. Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn, named after himself. And Pennsylvania was founded as a refuge for which religious group? Look at the picture, guys. Who does it remind you of? Close. Quakers. They are Quakers. It's a Quaker refuge because the Quakers like Quaker oatmeal. Oh, yeah. Guess what they grew? Well, no, they didn't grow oatmeal. They grew oats. Oats, yes. Oatmeal doesn't come out of the ground. You have to make that. That's a thing. Anyway, so it's a Quaker refuge because the Quakers were not very well liked. The Quakers were, nickname was also the Society of Friends. That was their official name. Not to be confused with the Super Friends. Very different organization. With Aquaman and Batman and Superman. Anyway, their official name was Quakers, but they're called the Society of Friends. And the reason why they were called the Quakers is that when they would pray in their town meetings, they would quake when they felt the voice of God coming to them. So they would sit down quietly, for example, and I'll be praying and quietly talking to God themselves. And as they felt the divine inspiration, they'd be like, I got it! We should plant corn on those fields over there. I'm like, oh, that's good. We should do that. That's a good idea. And then they would sit down and someone else would be like, oh, I got it. Taco Tuesdays. We do Taco Tuesdays. Oh, we should do that. So that's how Quakers worked. Anyway, some of the things that the Quakers believed. The doctrine of inner light. The doctrine of inner light, which said, where can truth be found? Within. Like, we can find truth from within. Truth is inside ourselves. So the doctrine of inner light, truth can be found within. Also, they believed that men and women were equal. So women should have a role in church. Yeah. Guys, they didn't even say he or she. They said thee and thou to like make sure there weren't any male, female pronouns or like, yeah, those things. They said thee and thou, which got really confusing. Like, I don't know how to say like, I don't know how to say this. It doesn't matter. Forget it. That joke failed. Furthermore, they were pacifists. They did not like fight. So So like when war was a coming, they'd be like, nah, they can take everything. We don't believe in killing. We don't believe in fighting. They were pacifists. They were pacifists. Obviously no alcohol, so alcohol was the thing for them. No laughing too loud. Hey, no. No. You laugh at a level that is appropriate for this colony. A chuckle is appropriate, but not like laughing out loud. LOL in the Quaker society was not allowed. On a Quaker phone, it won't do LOL. No rafflecopters, nothing like that. No roller skates. And they weren't a fan of taxes, so they had very few taxes. They didn't really pay taxes. They didn't like taxes. Yeah, so it did attract a lot of people. The other thing about the Quakers is that they believed in compensating Native Americans for their land. They believed in compensating Native Americans for their land. So again, they believed in compensating Native Americans for their land. What do I mean by that? They pay them. Yeah, they say, oh, here's like 5 bushels of corn and like 9 bracelets and like a PlayStation 3. And we will take this territory from you. And the Native Americans, that was much better because how did the North, the South, and the Spanish do it? They just took it or they killed them and then it's like, oh, well, the land is ours because you're dead. So they actually were willing to trade with the Native Americans, which is actually pretty good. These are one of those bracelets that they might receive as part of the trade to kind of signify the agreement. And right here, folks, is not the letter M, but a Native American and an English person shaking hands. Yeah, I know. I know. Tricky. I too thought it was the letter M for several years. And a student one day said, that's 2 people shaking hands. I'm like, really? I'm like, oh, it is 2 people shaking hands. I thought it was the letter M. I couldn't figure out, like, what does the M stand for? Like, is it some guy's last name or like a tribe? Or like maybe it's like a W? And like, no, it's 2 people. I'm like, oh, snap. 4 years I was showing this PowerPoint slide. Yeah, I know, I did 4 years. 4 years I was showing this PowerPoint slide, not realizing people shaking hands. The other thing you should note is that because of the popularity of Pennsylvania, because of its, oh, right, we're religiously tolerant. I didn't mention that. The Quakers were religiously tolerant. That's a big deal. Because of their popularity, Philadelphia, their capital, look what happened to their population. It got really populated because did people want to go there? Because the Quakers were religiously tolerant, few taxes, men and women were equal, they were pacifists, they gave Native Americans money for their land. Did a lot of people feel like this was a place to live? Sure. So Philadelphia earns the nickname the city of, close, brotherly love. Brotherly love, very close, brotherly love. Philadelphia. Again, much higher than Charleston or Boston or New York. Philadelphia gained very quickly as the city of the brotherly love, or city of brotherly love. So, general overview, pretty quick, and then we'll be done. Okay. Number 1, their economy. Their economy is mostly what, guys? Farming. And what did they farm? Oats. And wheat. In fact, folks, the nickname that the middle colonies got was the breadbasket of the colonies. Because their job was to feed the other colonies. They grew all the food. What are they growing in the southern colonies? Tobacco, indigo. Can they eat that? No. So it was the northern, the middle colonies feeding them with their wheat and their oats. And the northern colonies, some of them were subsistence, but did everyone in the north own their own land? No, and so they would buy their food from middle colonies. So the middle colonies gets to be known as the breadbasket of the colonies. Good there? Cool. The other thing you should note is that socially, they did have Quakers. And they were ethnically diverse and religiously tolerant.
Yes, they were.
They were ethnically diverse. This is my picture for diversity. And they were religiously tolerant. Ethnically diverse, ethnically, diverse and religiously tolerant. Yes, sir.
What's that photo right there?
This one? These are Quakers being put to death
Why?
because they were Quakers. And I remember how sometimes England is not very tolerant. They would put them to death. So that's why they came to America. And that's that for the middle colonies.